After Vatican II, when Duncan McDonnell came back from Peru, he was assigned to Immaculate Heart Parish where we belonged. And that was, I don't know, in the late 60s. He's the one who introduced me to it. He brought me to meetings, a couple of meetings at St. Joseph's College, University. And one year, they didn't take long, and they gave me the Share Land kit and said, John, you speak about development and peace at the Masses. It was quite an introduction for me. And of course, Duncan and I became friends, and we were friends until he died. I call him the social justice priest in Edmonton. So we had meetings in the parish basement, not too many, but it was organization. Eventually, then, I got involved at the diocesan level, and later on, even on the board, national board. Mary Emmerungen was the animator, and at that time, I have a lot of respect for her. She was an active woman.
So this goes back a number of years, but my involvement with development and peace, I think, grew out of involvement with Miles for Millions, and that was in the 70s, I believe, the late 70s, or mid-70s, and it was Miles for Millions, I think, was something that was started by the Lieutenant Governor Grant MacEwan, and it was one of the ways he was encouraging people to contribute to Third World, and promoted this walk, which was a 25 to 40 mile walk at the time. And so groups, Catholic Church particularly, the CWL in St. Albert, encouraged people to become participants in this walk, which the first year just about killed me because I didn't do any preparation or whatever. But that was an introduction to sort of the social justice component, the Third World, etc. And that, I think, encouraged me to become engaged in social justice at the church level. And there was Trish Young was in St. Albert at the time, and she was much involved with social justice issues as well. And so we attended some of those meetings that John spoke of as well. And so things just grew from there. And I participated at the local level at the church, and there was a group of young priests at the church at the time, Father Lavange, Jake Jolly, Ron Poirier. These were young people who became good friends of mine, and there was an attitude of engagement, there was an attitude of encouragement and involvement, and it was fun. It was a part of a community.
I would have to attribute my father to my introduction to development and peace. It was in my early teens. Dad was involved in development and peace, actually visiting some projects. He was involved at the diocesan level. And I worked for the Knights of Columbus Hall, a coat-check boy for bingos on Wednesday nights. And so once everyone was settled in and their coats were checked, I usually had time to do homework and the like, and Dad involved me in typing up some projects, some project proposals for work that Development and Peace was hoping to get funding for in other parts of the world. And so in reading and then typing these reports and these proposals, I just became much more aware of the inequalities in the world and the needs of people in other parts of the world. I was always interested in social studies and in the way people lived in other parts of the world, and so this really intrigued me.
I get involved in the winter 1974-1975, and I get recruited by Trish Young, Wolf Borgstead. Mary Emmerungen was the animator in those days. I believe Father Duncan McDonnell was just returned from Peru. So those would be key names and key people that were involved in me getting started and obviously worked with for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
What about Mike Flynn? What can you tell us about Flynn?
When Development Peace first starts, and they first start having animators, because there was to be an education program, I guess, from the very beginning. He came out to Edmonton with the job of being the Western regional animator, multi-province, right? And he was based here, and this would be before the first full-time Alberta animator, who would have been Sue Cumming, who I didn't know, and then followed by Mary Amarangan.
What do you remember, Betty? What are your first?
At 91, I don't remember much.
Those early years of development.
I'm just trying to think of where we even started.
You started at the cathedral.
Yes, that's right.
In the Development and
Development
Peace Group.
Peace Group there,
And then you joined the diocesan committee,
right?
and that's where I first met you.
Okay, yes.
And that's where Kate
And that's where
met
Kate,
you.
where I first met Kate, so that's all tied
And then
in.
we became a team,
Oh,
the three of us.
a great team.
We did.
Oh, we had some wonderful opportunities, didn't we? To meet the people and to know what was going on and to carry the message out. Oh, it was good.
Yeah.
It was very good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We had this retreat out at Camp Hee-Ho Haw. And it was Kate Quinn. Kate Quinn was the one who
she
who
came
was
after.
the animator at that time. And there was a really solid, group of people. We had a great time. It was a weekend. And we went, hiking around in the area and did some outdoor things and, had liturgy and it was just a really, really kind of fun time.
There was a lot of enthusiasm there.
A lot of enthusiasm and engagement and just a real close community. And Bob McKeon was part of it. Trish Young, Betty Farrell, all of these names, they bring us, they bring such fond memories. But it was a community, and the thing is, I think that the essence of the community and the purpose was clear. And Bob McKeon and the group that had an inner city community down in 97th Street or in that area there, they were the hub. They provided the example that it was still an inspiration to me. And for whatever reason, life goes on and things change and so on, but I think that there is still that spirit that exists within that group of people. Like Bob McKeon is still into social justice, etc., but he's one of the leaders that keeps it alive and keeps the flames warm. But anyway, that's just a memory in reference to community.
Yeah, I think that is still there, I think, to Bob McKeon's area.
Yeah. And but I mean, we're all getting older, so I mean, you got guys like Louis coming along, and that's encouraging. I think I see that in my own involvement with Camp Encounter, which I became a part of later on after Development and Peace.
I got started actually through the Social Justice Institute, which of course you were quite involved in as well. When I went out, I think maybe to the very first one or the second one, I'm not sure which, but it was Betty Farrell and Trish Young.
Oh, Betty Farrell, of course.
Yeah, who had a display table of Development and Peace material sitting there, and so probably like at one of the breaks or over the lunch hour or something, I'm looking around at the various material because I was quite new to all this. And they had a sign-up sheet, and I put my name and my phone number. Right, no email back then. This is like 1980 or 81, something like that. And they called me a couple weeks later. One or the other of them called me on the phone a couple weeks later and invited me to come to what was, I imagine, was a council meeting. First I was just kind of a hanger-on, and then a couple of years later got actually onto the council. And so, Trish and Betty were quite involved at that point in time. But other people that I remember, other names that I remember would be Liz Reed, who came along after I was there on the council, and Guy Milner,
Right.
who was, I think he actually may have been the archdiocesan chairperson
Yeah.
for a while there.
And then Kathleen Quinn would have been the animator.
And Kathleen Quinn was the animator at that point in time, yes.
I'd retired in 1997, moved to Edmonton. 1998, I was looking for an area where I could contribute something, so I joined Development of Peace. I went down to the office on 107th Avenue, met Bob Schmidt and Betty Farrell, and I was just so impressed I stayed. So I very shortly after that joined the Executive Council, and the rest was history. It was I acted as secretary for 2 years. I think it was 99, 2000. By 2001, we discovered that the office was being moved to the pastoral center. And that kind of changed the dynamics of everything there. On 107th Avenue, we were kind of more related to, there was Catholic Social Justice was there. There were 3 or 4 other organizations that were also renting space in that office complex. And so they called it a coalition, but it was basically just to share the rent. But it also meant that we had other avenues of contact that when we moved, and some of them couldn't continue, and that was part of the reason that that move was made as well. But once we were here, then we lost that kind of social side of it, and became more involved with other aspects of the diocese here in the building.
And roughly around that same time that Angus was coming in, it was a Solidarity visitor that pulled me into Development and Peace, and not just me, it was my wife Joanna as well. And so we had a Solidarity visitor from Peru, from a small town called Tambo Grande. Yeah, and he had come to the University of Alberta, which at that time was hosting annually a human rights conference. And it was and I was asked to translate for him. And after his presentation, he had a meeting with both Bob and Trish Young. Trish Young was instrumental in my recruitment to Development and Peace. If it wasn't for her, she was the one who kept knocking on the door, kind of situation. And so I had the opportunity to talk to Trish and Bob, and they said, well, why don't you come and volunteer with Development and Peace? But right at that time was the 500 years since the invasion of the Americas. So I was kind of going through my own identity politics of, figuring out who I was as a person and things like that, and confronting, past narratives that I didn't agree with in terms of, the conquest of the Americas. So it was a little tough for Trish to get me in at first, but then once I understood the message of Development and Peace, it became a no-brainer for Joanna and I, and we were looking for something that we could volunteer together at. So that's how we were pulled in, and eventually met Angus. But that was through a social that we did at Trish Young's house, where Ken Whittingham had come. Ken Whittingham was really the communications director for Development and Peace at the national level, and he was visiting. So both of the ways that I was pulled in was through someone who was actually visiting here, and we had the reason to socialize and break bread together. Yeah.
I would have to say that the person who actually invited me to participate with Development Peace for the very first time was Angela Vitale and Alamella, because my experience growing up didn't really politicize me until I was in my early 20s or almost mid-20s. And so I actually went on a big spiritual journey trying to figure out what it meant to be a good Christian, a good follower of Christ, a good Catholic. And nobody was able to really connect that with history or politics. And so actually my entry into service was actually just doing volunteer work and doing things. But the more I got involved with justice work, the more I saw that there were structural injustices that had to be addressed. And that got me kind of anxious to do more. And I started doing work with the Social Justice Committee at my church. And at the very first meeting that I went to, Angela and Al both told me that I would be a very excellent candidate for a workshop that was going on by Development and Peace. And that was, I remember the night, the first time I went there, the very first day, right away. I had never heard anybody connect the evangelical message and so many teachings of Jesus with direct, practical ways of living it in a world that was completely torn between ideologies, economics, historical wars, and ongoing colonization through different methods.
Just to give a bit of a line from where we came in to where Julio came in, when Rod and Joanna joined, we didn't have an office anywhere because the 107th Street office had closed down. This one wasn't set up yet. We weren't even sure if we had one here yet.
Yeah.
So we met at our place. And so there was Rod, Joanna, Carol Lee, myself, and Georgina Lords. So there was 5 of us. The only Georgina and I had been involved before. Nobody else. And so we were kind of saying, well, okay, we've discovered where zero is. There's where we are. We have no idea. And so everything built from that base, which was really not a base at all. And so it led us, in my reflection on that, it leads back to a real sense of the Holy Spirit moving us.
We tried to be community so that we could be the example. I remember having those discussions several times. So, and there being a dichotomy between even the people who were on the executive, where there was people who wanted to break bread together, get together, watch a movie, and those that were, well, I'm too busy to do that. And then often the problem was that, well, the ones that did get together and watch a movie or have dinner, you couldn't help but talk about the business of the executive. And then that led to some people feeling excluded. So it was very difficult to balance all of that. And one of the things that I remember very early on when Georgina Lawrence was still part of the executive is that we had a meeting, and for me what was very important was to establish a strategic plan. And I don't know for Julio and Angus, but for me it was instrumental to have that strategic plan. And as we went on, we refined it, and it became, in my mind, it became an excellent tool to guide the executive.
And I think everybody who had an opportunity to work with people like Trish, it just made it something so special within our own religious life. Mm-hmm. It was very special. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's always been the people for me, the people, over 30 years that I've met, whether they've come from the south and they've been so inspiring, or the volunteers here, here, like this woman
yes.
here, whom I always said when I grow up I want to be like Betty Farrell. But
So
I
true.
never made it. I'll never make it. And from Kate, that I learned so much from.
Oh, we've learned so much from
Just-
each other.
Just
And we did so
incredible
many things
people.
that we couldn't have done without each other.
That's right.
No, that's right.
That's
It
right,
was it was community work.
That's
and
right.
It was.
And we
being
were able
part
to
of the
move into the community
yeah.
in different ways
Yes.
because we had different personalities and different
Yes.
thoughts about what was going on and enlarge them in our own way. Oh no, it was very, very, something very special in our lives, I
Yes,
think.
very. Yes.